On tonight's episode of Mr. Norris's In Case You Missed It, we look at the Siege of Vicksburg. How did Ulysses S. Grant help the Union Army capture the Mississippi River? And why was the Siege of Vicksburg so important?
Hey, hello, hi, and what is up, everybody? It's your host, Mr. Norris, the history teacher with the good hair. And tonight we're going to be talking about the Siege of Vicksburg and the Western theater of the Civil War in general. Yes, very exciting stuff here on tonight's episode. All right, so like I said, we're mostly focusing on the Battle of Vicksburg, why it was important and what it entailed, but we're also going to cover the entire Western theater of the Civil War. And we cannot do that without mentioning the most prominent Union general of the Civil War, and that is Ulysses S. Grant. Now, a lot of the information that I'm going to give on tonight's episode is based on the book Grant by Ron Chernow and the documentary that recently just came out over Memorial Day. I have been reading this book, Grant by Ron Chernow, and it is absolutely fantastic. I highly recommend. Not only is it a great book, but you could also use it in place of a cinder block if you need be. It's 900 pages, and it can also be a small arms weapon. I'm just kidding, kids. I don't condone violence. But it is a massive, massive book. Okay, so again, to understand the true story of the Western theater and leading up to the Siege of Vicksburg, we need to start really with the Union strategy going into the Civil War in general. Now, I've covered this in past videos, or will cover this in upcoming videos, but the plan for the Union Army to win the Civil War against the South and to restore the Union at first was called the Anaconda Plan, developed by Winfield Scott, and it basically had three main steps to it. One, the United States and the Union Army was going to use their naval superiority to surround the southern coast, okay, and block all of their ports. That way, if their navy is blocking the ports, the South can't do things like import goods to help the war effort or export cotton in order to sell to foreign countries and make money to prolong the war effort. And that step's going to be able to be accomplished relatively quickly because the Confederacy at the onset of the Civil War doesn't really have a naval force to speak of. Okay. Now, step two is to capture the Mississippi River. Okay, and basically cut the Confederacy in half. And this serves two goals: cut the Confederacy in half, like I just said, some of the western states like Texas that are on the other side of the Mississippi River, but also it's a main source of transportation to ship goods to southern states and to travel and move things up and down the Mississippi River, put them on railroads, and send them to other parts of the Confederacy. If the Union Army can control that, that will definitely shorten the time of the Civil War. And the last step is to capture the Confederate capital at Richmond, Virginia. And that's going to be defended by the Army of Northern Virginia and Robert E. Lee. That's going to prove to be the most difficult part of this Anaconda Plan to win the Civil War. Now, the first two steps are accomplished much easier. And step two, capturing the Mississippi River, is accomplished in most part thanks to General Ulysses S. Grant. I plan on doing a video about his whole story in the future, so I'm not going to get into every single thing. But just know that Ulysses S. Grant was born in Ohio, kind of moved around a lot during his life, living in Ohio and Kentucky and Missouri, and then on the onset of the Civil War from Illinois. And he had gone to West Point. He had served in the Mexican-American War as a quartermaster and really got his feet wet in combat and understanding armies and logistics and how they move and how they operate. And once the Civil War breaks out, he was more like a moderate kind of Democrat who, didn't want to see the expansion of slavery, but wasn't necessarily a full-on abolitionist. But he was definitely pro-union, and he felt that he wanted to serve his country and, stay true to that cause. And he did. He was actually, because of his military experience, given an appointment as the 21st Illinois Infantry Commander. And then he's going to work his way up there, from there during the Civil War to commander of the Army of Tennessee, and then commanding all of the division of Missouri and Mississippi. And then literally, to Major General to Brigadier General to up to Major General and then to Lieutenant General after that, which I'll get to in just a second here. Now, Ulysses S. Grant really first gets his name out in national prominence in 1862. And using the command of the forces that he has in the Western theater of the war, he first attacks in February of 1862 Fort Henry and Fort Donelson in Tennessee. And you can see on this map right here. He thought that the best tactic to fight during the Civil War was to be aggressive. Be aggressive. be aggressive. Okay, I'm sorry. I'll stop doing that. But he didn't think that the Union Army should rest on its laurels and just say, well, we have more manpower and resources, we'll let the Confederacy use up all of theirs and we'll hang back. He wanted to push the issue. And he pleaded with some of his superiors to let him go in and attack Fort Henry and Fort Donaldson. Fort Henry was taken pretty easily along the Mississippi River using gunboats at his disposal. And Donaldson was taken a little bit later in February 1862. And there was a little bit more to that battle. Some vicious fighting took place. There's actually a little story where Ulysses S. Grant, during the Battle of Donaldson, the Confederates had a real pushback outside of the fort against Union forces, and some of the underlings underneath Ulysses S. Grant were saying to him, "Hey, maybe we should retreat. Maybe we should fall back. They're beginning an offensive." And he looked through some of the ration bags of Confederate troops that they had captured and realized that they had multiple days' rations. And he concluded that no, they're not actually attacking; they're retreating. And he pushed forward and took Donaldson. And interesting enough, he also gets a pretty cool nickname after Fort Donaldson. He gives the surrounding general, who I believe was Buckner at Fort Donaldson, his conditions were unconditional surrender, meaning we're not going to make any deals and nothing like that. You and your men need to have an unconditional surrender. And that becomes his nickname, U.S. Grant, Unconditional Surrender Grant. What a cool nickname. I wish I had a cool nickname like that. My wife calls me Bubba sometimes. That's not a cool nickname. That's like, the only people that have that nickname are in like some kind of competitive food eating competitions. Like, that's whatever. I digress. Anyway, that's where he gets his nickname the first time he comes and rises to national prominence. Now, not too long after Fort Donaldson, Ulysses S. Grant wants to take his troops further down the Mississippi River into the state of Mississippi and wants to focus on a rail center called Corinth. But he is actually trapped between two rivers at the Battle of Shiloh by Union forces. And the first day of Shiloh, he loses pretty badly, actually. Again, being surprised and really not understanding where the Confederacy was coming from. And there's a really famous quote of his from the Ron Chernow book that I really like, where he's talking to William Tecumseh Sherman after the first day of battle. And Sherman says, we've had the devil's own day. Basically, we've seen hellish fighting today. And Grant says, we'll look him tomorrow, though. And that's a perfect quote that encompasses his mindset in the Civil War, right? Lost today, but we'll look him tomorrow. He was always eager and ready to push the initiative and fight and be aggressive. And this is why Abraham Lincoln really grows to love him. Other Union generals were scared of the Confederacy and scared to push the issue. Ulysses S. Grant was certainly not. He recovers day 2 of Shiloh. They wind up winning that battle. And then he does push down into Corinth and does help the Union Army take the rail station there. Now, fast forward to 1863, and now this is where we get towards Vicksburg, and really probably his what historians consider his finest moment during the Civil War, as far as like strategy and military genius goes. Vicksburg was an absolutely crucial fortification and city that needed to be taken along the Mississippi River if you were going to fully control the Mississippi River. Look at a map of Vicksburg right here, and you can see that it was right around a horseshoe bend of the Mississippi River, and it sat very up on a hill in elevation, and it could overlook the Mississippi River. And if you had control of Vicksburg, you basically could control anything that came up and down the Mississippi River. And it had lots of guns, well defended, and it was just, a kind of a strategic necessity in order to capture it. Well, in March 1863, Grant begins his successful surrounding of Vicksburg, if you will. He had tried everything to get his troops up on that hill and surrounding the city in the months leading up to that. But he finally makes a breakthrough in March 1863. He's able to get a naval flotilla of ships and gunboats that will eventually also be guarding transports to sneak past Vicksburg. It's almost like a midnight run, go a little bit further down south the Mississippi River where his troops can meet them and cross the river and get to the other side. This is a naval flotilla, not a tortilla or a quesadilla, but a flotilla. And it's really successful. Like I said, he does the run at midnight. He tells his naval commanders underneath him to hug the coast right along Vicksburg, which makes the Confederates, it makes it hard for them to aim down at the ships. And he loses almost nothing. And it's a smashing success. From there, he marches his troops back up north to Vicksburg. But he realizes that not far away from Vicksburg is the capital, Jackson, Mississippi. Jackson, Mississippi. I'm sorry, every time I hear that now, I think of that Bruno Mars song. It is very catchy. And he decides, if I lay a full siege onto Vicksburg and turn my back to Jackson, I can leave myself open for attack, and he doesn't want to do that. And against the wishes of some of his subordinates and some of the people that are creating these plans with him, he actually decides May 14th, 1863 to attack Jackson as well, repel the Confederate forces there led by Joe Johnston, and then turn his efforts back towards Vicksburg, Mississippi, and begin his siege May 18th, 1863. Now this siege lasts for 47 days. And he literally thinks through every little bit of the process so thoroughly. It's amazing. He builds fortifications facing Vicksburg and also behind him in case he gets attacked again. He puts every gun that he has available, big gun, artillery weapon, on the city of Vicksburg and bombards it. He even takes naval guns and does it. And again, this siege lasts for 47 days. Just absolutely blasting, bombarding the city, not letting anything come in or out. The situation inside the city becomes so desperate that the civilians actually evacuate their homes. They make little, almost like makeshift apartments inside of hillsides. They make little caves that they're staying in. There's almost little to no food left. They're eating dogs, they're eating horses, they're eating rats. Yummy! And the situation is absolutely desperate. Now, as far as the strengths there, you have 70,000 Union troops and only 29,000 Confederates holding out the city. So chances are that they're going to be able to hold this for a really long time are slim and none. And eventually the conditions deteriorate so much so that the Confederate Army sees no other option but to surrender on July 4th, 1863. So on the 4th of July, Vicksburg is captured. And this is a day after also the Union victory at Gettysburg in Pennsylvania. So double whammy right there for Confederacy. Two absolute gut punches to them in July of 1863 that are going to greatly weaken their effort going forward. Why is Vicksburg so important? This victory, it basically opens up all access to the Mississippi River for the Union Army. As Abraham Lincoln said, the Union Army again goes unvexed to the sea, which is absolutely important. They basically completed step 2 of the Anaconda Plan after Vicksburg. It's also the first time in combat, I don't want to leave this out, that runaway slaves actually start coming over to the Union Army. They're adopted into the Army and actually see some service during Vicksburg and during that whole campaign that year. It's after this that Ulysses S. Grant literally becomes the hero of the Civil War for the Union Army. He becomes a national icon. He is praised in newspapers after the capture of Vicksburg. And right after this, he's going to be asked to come east, meet with Abraham Lincoln, who will give him the title of Lieutenant General, only held by George Washington ever in history before this. And he's going to oversee the entire Union Army efforts going forward. And he's going to square off against Robert E. Lee in the east after this. And things are going to get very, very interesting. So there you go. You have basically the Western theater, everything that took place, Ulysses S. Grant and his mastery out west. If we're going to give him a theme song for that, it would be All I Do Is Win, 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 No Matter What. I'm sorry, that was very, very cringy. And then he has his, cherry on top, if you will, at Vicksburg, again, opening up the Mississippi River. Hope you enjoyed the video, guys. And remember that in every country, the surest basis for public happiness is knowledge. So go out there and get some.
Hey, thanks so much for watching in case you missed it. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please feel free to like, comment, or subscribe down below. Any of that would be just fine. Thank you so much for your appreciation of history, and I hope you come back and check out another video.